It really grinds my gears when people come up through the southern border, knowingly, criminally breaking the rules.
Do you think there's a sort of anti-Trump vibe in the UK that could harm Nigel Farage?
Some softer Tories, some wetter Tories that might make them think twice. And hopefully Nigel and Zia will forgive me for saying this, but none of the people he had previously fallen out with were massive party donors at the same time. They had a Project 2025 over here in the United States before the last election.
Yeah,
they needed Project 2029.
Still with me this evening is Raheem Kassam, editor of the National Pulse, man about town, dandy of DC, runs a very popular MAGA watering hole, I think we're still allowed to call it. But once upon a time, you did work in Britain. You once ran, I think, for leader of UKIP. You are a close personal friend.
We all did, didn't we?
In the future, everyone will be leader of UKIP for 15 minutes. You were a close personal friend of Nigel Farage. We had a fascinating chat last week about whether Britain is ready for Farage, whether Farage is ready to be PM. We were touching there on, that immigration is going to be the third rail of British politics for some time. It's going to, it needs to be grappled. Is Farage ready to face the scale, I think, of what needs to be done in Britain? As we said, tinkering around the edges is over. Calls for a British ICE. You discuss mass deportations, not just of foreign criminals, but of illegal migrants. Stop putting them in four-star hotels. Leave organisations like the ECHR. Potentially renegotiate our relationship with the United Nations if we really want to do some of this stuff. Is he ready, and does he get it?
Well, look, and by the way, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I think the immigration thing is something that will keep coming up. And the reason I brought up Enoch in the last section is because before he gave his speech in 1968, he said, look, what I'm about to say is going to go up like a rocket into the firmament and stay there. And it has stayed there as an issue. The immigration topic has never gone away.
He later said, even despite the controversy and then he lost his job, he later said, I misunderestimated the numbers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, if we actually think about what... I'm not trying to debate the speech or its political expediency in the moment, but if we look at what was controversial of him saying then versus what is actually happening now, what is actually controversial is what's happening now. Is the open borders nature of so many Western countries? Is the way that we're giving so much away to people who actually, look, if you're like my parents and you came to be part of Britain and raise your kids as British with British values, then we're all for that.
Yeah, some of the most angry people about illegal migration are first, second, and third generation migrants to countries that played by the rules, didn't skip the queue.
And as somebody who has gone through a very lengthy and expensive immigration process in the United States also, it really grinds my gears when people come up through the southern border, knowingly, criminally breaking the rules, get all of these handouts when they come to the United States, and then more than anything get mollycoddled by politicians and mollycoddled by the left because of any number of issues, right? They want these people voting, they want them as indentured servants and whatever they have in mind for these people. But it really grinds my gears as somebody who's done it, whose family's done it the right way twice now.
Yeah.
Look, I think, in answer to your question about reform and Nigel Farage, they have until 2029, perhaps 2028.
Yeah, or even sooner if Keir Starmer carries on like he's going.
But they do need this time. They need this time to learn, they need this time to grow, they need this time to build. They need thousands of people to man government. Yep. They need hundreds of lords. They're going to need several different things tracked.
You offering your services there. Will that get you back to the United Kingdom? Lord Kassam.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I'll offer. Is they had a Project 2025 over here in the United States before the last election.
Yeah,
they need a Project 2029.
For our readers in the UK who are probably not quite aware of the listeners in the UK who are not quite aware of the Project 2025, just fill us in exactly what that is.
It was a plan. It was a policy and personnel plan put together externally to the Trump administration to say, look, here's what you should be doing, here's how you can do it. It was a tome. It was 600 A4 pages back and forth, right? It was absolutely massive. And the left freaked out over it. Why? Not because it was necessarily controversial, because it was so detailed.
We talk about what needs to be done around, for Nigel Farage and reform, legislation ready to go. bills drafted, the threat, as you say, of creating 1,000 new members of the House of Lords to ram through anything that is resisted by the deep state. I just want to stick on this as Farage, the man that you know very well. You were his aide-de-camp for years and years and years. You've been at his side. You know the mettle of the man.
Yep.
I've noticed a dramatic, I hate the word professionalisation, but I thought what was really interesting recently was when he had that bust up with Zia Youssef, who was the sort of party chairman at the time, who quit on the Friday, was back in his job on the Saturday. That was the first time I ever saw anyone cross Nigel Farage publicly and not be sent into the political wilderness. History is littered with people that Farage has fallen out with through UKIP, through Reform, through the Brexit Party, and the like. It does seem to me a little bit like he's gearing up. He is realising he cannot do it all. He is going to have to share the load. Is that fair?
I might reject that premise for a crude reason, and hopefully Nigel and Zia will forgive me for saying this, but none of the people he had previously fallen out with were massive party donors at the same time.
Right.
It does help.
Okay, there was my lofty, doughy-eyed vision of a man preparing for power with a weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but it's all about the money.
I think if Zia couldn't stroke a cheque for £1 million, he'd be in a very different place right now. I think that was his saving grace in that moment, because he really let a lot of people down very quickly. Like you said, threw his toys out of the pram and just said, I can't do this anymore, whatever. And when you're a major party donor, actually, whether we like it or not, political parties rely on donations, and so party leaders necessarily will make more effort that way. So I don't think that is necessarily the sign of it. What I think is the sign of it, the sign of the professionalisation, as you say, is the conference. And I was there. I went in Birmingham.
I mean, compared to the scenes we're seeing today, at Tory party conferences, looks like a sparsely attended village fair / Women's Institute meeting with vast empty seats, and then we're going to get onto this, the sort of almost turning point vibes of the Reform concert. You had the pyrotechnics, you had the disco music, you had the neon lights, you had it felt like it was some place, a party going somewhere.
Somebody turned to me during the event and said, wow, this is like a Trump rally. And I said, no, it's better than a Trump rally. Besides Andrea Jenkins singing, it was perfect.
You know both Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, and you are a keen student of the MAGA movement. Obviously, Trump, 45, Trump won round one was, as we discussed earlier in the show, bit of a cluster. I'm not going to swear, because I told you weren't allowed to, so I can't. And then you've got Trump 2.0, which, he almost had 4 years in the wilderness to prepare all this stuff. How much is, when Nigel Farage and Donald Trump are speaking, how much communication is there between the teams on what needs to be done? And, that similar thing of, Trump coming in with 200 executive orders ready to go, move fast, break things, haven't got long. How much behind the scenes, advice do you think is going on?
There has naturally been a lot of shared practice over the years. I'll give you an example. You played a clip of Stephen Miller earlier on in the show. Stephen Miller used to attend and stand at the back of the room when Nigel used to come to the United States and give speeches. I know, because I was the one vetting the RSVP list.
Wow.
And I would see him in the room. And I think there's even a picture of Stephen Miller with Paul Nuttall.
Paul Nuttall,
the former deputy leader of UKIP.
They look very. They both look very similar.
Yeah, we call it a force multiplier. But there is that sort of osmosis effect within the movement, within the broader populist movement on both sides of the Atlantic. What there isn't at the moment, to my understanding, is a formalised back and forth amongst the teams. Now, the men will talk about this stuff. Farage and Trump talk about this stuff all the time. But the teams actually should be sitting down together and sharing best practice now.
Do you think that will happen, and who is the bridge to do it? Obviously, we've sadly lost an ambassador who sat in that chair not so long ago, Peter Mandelson. Obviously, he was a Labour appointee. There's always been this talk of Nigel Farage, being that role as a bridge to the United States. Obviously, he can't do that now, because every single poll in the United Kingdom would suggest that he's going to be the next Prime Minister. Who do you think is who the figure is that could, bring Nigel Farage and MAGA together.
Look, I'll say, Amy,
Fancy the job?
we haven't. No, we haven't. I've been doing it, right? Like that's what I've done up to this point. No, I think there are more characters coming into play here now. Remember, who did David Cameron hire to help his political campaign in 2010? It was
Steve Hilton.
But it was one of Obama's advisors.
Oh, yes, of course.
Jim Messina came over to the United Kingdom to try and help him out. I think famously lost him the Rochester by-election along the way.
One for the connoisseurs there, 2014.
Yeah. No, we're getting into it. It's important. But I think necessarily after this administration is sort of done, which is usually about halfway through an admin, people start filtering out. I think a lot of people will look around the world and the people like perhaps Corey Lewandowski and Jason Miller and all these types will sort of look at the United Kingdom and go, right, it's time to help them out now.
Yeah, and so the sort of movement goes on. Steve Bannon's obviously, played a key role in what happened with the rise of Giorgia Meloni in Italy. He's played a key role across Europe. How do you think that will go down in the United Kingdom? Could it potentially harm reform in the polls? The Lib Dems are obviously the natural anti-Trump party. Keir Starmer obviously sucks up a lot to Donald Trump because he has to, because he's the Prime Minister of a special relationship. Do you think there's a sort of anti-Trump vibe in the UK that could harm Nigel Farage if he's seen too close?
I think certainly there's some softer Tories, some wetter Tories that might make them think twice. But what you gain, it's not even close, right? What you gain in terms of efficacy, competency, professionalisation, fundraising ability, all of that.
Raheem Kassam, you've been brilliant. Thank you for joining us on Harry Cole Saves the West. Come again soon.